Hi, welcome to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to talk about the role of fear in chronic back pain. I'm going to touch on two areas, the fear of emotions and the fear of bodily sensations. I'll give a rundown of sort of what fear is, first of all, just to give a little introduction. And then I'm going to talk about the role of fear in relation to our pain going on longer than we wish. So i.e. chronic back pain and other chronic symptoms have been linked to the areas that I'm going to discuss today. There is a lot of new research and scientific research too in relation to this. So I'll do my best to cover what I can, but there's also a lot of material and a lot of other sort of doctors, therapists and neuroscientists who are discovering the role of fear when it comes to chronic pain. So let's jump into it. First, an introduction to fear, sort of what is fear? You might be familiar with the sort of fight-flight response, like a physiological response to fear. And there's also a freeze response to fear, i.e. sort of a shutdown, dissociation sort of state. The response of fear is an evolutionary process, i.e. when we used to have the only challenge of our environment being predators, so let's say back in the caveman days, I suppose you could say, where predators, lions, bears, wherever you were, snakes, there could be danger around. It could even be other human tribes and such, right? So our system and the physiology of all mammals and animals and living things get afraid. And especially when we feel that we are at risk. Now, danger can come in many forms, and the physiological response to danger can also come in many forms. So, to give a couple of examples, if there is a lion and you need to run away, it's likely your nervous system and your physiological response will bring a sense of action to you. So again, the action part of that is to fight or flight, i.e. your system will trigger these responses and then you will enact on those responses automatically, as opposed to sort of thinking about it. You don't really think about running away, you just run away because that's the instinct, right? It's the same with the freeze response. The freeze response is essentially a complete shutdown. So your nervous system will shut down and almost dissociate from the body. So you kind of a bit like anxiety, I suppose, because that is a form of fear as well, where you feel a little bit frozen, a little bit stuck, and that's the freeze response, i.e., cognitively you kind of shut down a little bit, you can't really think, but you're just frozen, you're stuck, you're terrified, basically, in shock. So those are a couple of the ways in which physiologically fear shows up. Another example is a reaction to certain foods. So let's say poisonous foods. You eat a berry back in the day, that person dies or it becomes very ill, then the physiological response to that berry will be a feeling of sick, a feeling like, oh no, I don't eat that because that is dangerous. So physiologically, our system is designed to keep us alive, and the fear response is essential to that. Sometimes, though, the fear response, especially as we experience it, because we have the ability to essentially think about the sensations that are going on in our body. So it's not always possible for us to truly embody the physiological response to fear in certain situations in our life. Those situations I'll discuss again from the space of fear of emotions and the fear of our bodily sensations, because these two particular areas are really important when trying to understand chronic pain, other chronic conditions, my own situation, and the individuals I feel so closely to support is chronic back pain, because I've been through a lot of the work and I experienced this firsthand. So I'll do my best to sort of articulate as best I can, because it can be a little bit complicated at times, understanding the links of fear and pain. And that's also largely through the information that we've had so far in relation to chronic pain, where we're often obsessed with certain body parts being broken or weak or damaged, especially in terms of muscle pain and that sort of thing that persists for longer than it takes to really heal. So touching upon emotions, how do we become afraid of our emotions? The first point, I suppose, is childhood. So for instance, if you grew up in an environment where you were told off for crying or being a bit angry or frustrated as a child. Now, this can happen innocuously. It doesn't necessarily have to be a abusive element to our childhood. It can be as innocuous as someone saying don't cry or don't be afraid, or from the space of love, the message for us as that child is, it's not okay to cry. So in that particular example, let's say we get to a point where we don't really feel comfortable expressing ourselves as when we're children, and crying is either seen as weak or just undesirable because, for whatever reason, the caregiver or the parent at hand wasn't really able to support you as properly in the process of being upset. So messages like don't cry come forth towards us. It could be a little harsher in some respects for some people over others. Obviously, we've all had our past, we all have a different experience of this, but in that example, what I'm trying to press forward is the idea that if we receive the message enough times to not cry, then eventually we become aware that it's undesirable for our caregivers or our parents to experience us crying. So inadvertently we begin to repress and suppress. So repress being we're not knowing that we're pushing it down, and suppress being, well, we kind of know we're pushing it down, but we need to do it anyway. And it's always in light of survival. So back to this fear response, we're always physiologically geared towards survival, evolutionary as well. This is why the fear response has evolved within us so acutely, because, without the response to the dangerous tiger, we don't run away, and then we die, and then we don't procreate, etc. Evolutionary process. In relation to the emotions, and I'll stick to sadness for now, because for me that was something that was very much a space of avoidance. The emotional movement that runs through us at the time where, for instance, we are crying, and we've all maybe experienced that kind of shaking, the crying, the trembling, it doesn't feel good, it's like we don't accept sadness culturally very, very good, actually, very well. We often always associate it with being something wrong, and it's kind of taboo, and we need to be strong, etc., etc. All of these connotations are linked to us not connecting to our difficult emotions. And again, if we become so afraid, let's say, to express emotions because of our history and because of cultural taboos and because of things that we've made up now in our head, the decision that crying is not safe. So we have to adapt, or our system has to adapt by creating, let's say, mechanisms that deny those emotions in ourselves. So cognitively, we're very good at denying things. So, I mean, the common greeting that we do often with other people is, oh, hey, how's it going? How's things? And often, yeah, I'm fine, I'm good. Whereas the reality is not that. That's just a very simple message of be aware of the sensations in your system and the emotions, and essentially learning to be more honest with yourself. Now, the way that this turns into a sort of a physical and physiological sort of condition, so let's say back pain, tension, this sort of thing, is the fact that emotions, they start in the body, they move through the body, and in that sense, our muscles, our tissues, the blood flow, various chemicals that run through our system create what is known as the fear response. So our nervous system and gets sort of jacked up. We maybe get an adrenaline rush, and you know, all of these things in times of stress are going on in our body, and it can be uncomfortable because we get hot, we feel agitated, we maybe start to shake because the fear response is also sort of a gripping, and you know, we want to you know, protect ourselves, hide away. That sort of tucking in is like a protecting our internal organs. So the physiological response, again, this evolutionary process, is there to protect us. Now the challenge comes because it feels quite uncomfortable in the body, and if you don't have the space to safely express these emotions, especially when you're younger, then these physiological responses, the gripping, the tightness, the hotness, the tension, the agitation, becomes a bit of a threat. So we then interpret these sensations as a threat to us, and pain is a response to a threat. So you stub your toe, the threat is the table or the chair, and you've hurt your toe. So your body says, that hurt, you just hurt yourself on this table, right? And on the next time you walk past that, you might remember the last time you did it, and you'll be careful not to stub your toe again. Or if you do, you then might consider yourself to be clumsy or whatever, and start to explain away the reasons why you stub your toe, etc., etc. So the point I guess I'm making there is our ability to explain away sensations, and moving back to the emotional sort of repression and suppression, is that it's very common for us to try and explain the reasons why we are feeling agitated. So instead of being with the agitation, understanding and maybe learning to connect with our emotions more, we have this wonderful gift, if you want to call it a gift, to cognitize things and make sense of them by convincing ourselves and others that we're okay, when actually underneath we are you know, I don't know, desperately sad or resentful or angry or whatever. So in a summary to the sort of fear of emotions, because obviously the link to the body and the body sensation is so strong, it's a great segue into the bodily sensations aspect of the video that I'm going to go into. You know, it can be challenging understanding and connecting to emotions that have been very difficult for us for a long time, simply because a habit has been built up. So if we feel, let's say, the shaking or the tension of I don't know, like a fear comes through us for some reason, you know, there's a situation where we start to feel that, and then it gets connected in our brain to the same sensations as when we were a kid, and maybe we were beginning to be afraid of crying or expressing our emotions effectively. So instead of allowing that emotional pain and the tears to come through us, we stop it, we repress it, and we start to feel pain and tension and associate these sensations with the pain and tension, because it's almost easier than actually connecting to the deep and troubling emotion that is sitting there. So pain becomes a distraction from deep sadness, deep anger, and other complex emotions like grief and guilt, shame, these sorts of things. And that's just simply a protection mechanism. So when we were a kid, it clearly was perceived as not being safe, i.e., I'm going to be rejected if I cry. That's a mode of not being safe. And instead of crying and being rejected, I'm gonna, you know, we begin to get tummy ache. So instead of crying, oh, we've got a tummy ache, and then we get the support that we need. But maybe embedded in that tummy ache is just a kid that wants to cry, but their experience is too much. So you can see how this can, if this goes on for long enough, these habits build up quite quickly and quite easily, and essentially our system is protecting us from feeling the deep and sad emotion, and then it creates a stomach ache instead. So then we focus on the stomach ache and we focus on the bodily sensations before we feel safe to go to the emotions. I'm going to touch a little bit on the end of the video on a few ways in which you can learn to connect to your emotions. There's multiple ways to do that. First, I'm going to talk now a bit about the fear of bodily sensations. So this again is a nice segue from the fear of emotions, because of the quite obvious link of body and mind and emotional movement through the body. You know, essentially means that if we feel like a tension, and as I've said before, we learn to associate that tension in our body as something that is dangerous. It can often just be like an undesirable feeling, this undesirable feeling of being afraid. You know, we all have anxieties, we all have fears, and these things show up in our body. We sweat, etc. Like I said before, we sweat, we have tension, we get agitated, adrenaline starts to rush through our system, so we can kind of speed up, let's say. These sort of sensations that happen through our body can be really uncomfortable. And coupling that with this sort of the emotions that could be tied up with the bodily sensations, we then begin to become afraid of the sensations in our body. An example can be something repetitive, like a pattern to your pain. Like if I sit down for a long time, I get back pain. It could be just doing certain exercises or being in certain positions, or if you're doing certain stretches that if you're a sufferer of chronic back pain, you'll know what I mean. You know, you'll have a tension in a particular area and you won't want to go there. You don't want to engage with the muscle group that that pain is associated with. So the fear of our bodily sensations is just that. It is what it says basically. It's like if you have a muscle spasm or if you have a feeling of tension in your body, then there's a high possibility you might begin to become afraid of the sensation in itself, and then you begin to avoid the sensation in itself. So it's almost like the layer above the emotion. So obviously the emotion can start things on a ground level, and then the fear of the actual movement of the body comes through enough times of understanding or realizing or learning, let's say, because we learn very easily. Our brain learns patterns very easily, and then you begin to associate the pattern of movement with pain, and then you begin to sit in the boat of fear of bodily sensations. They call this neuroplastic pain in some corners of mind-body work. Alan Gordon, who I've mentioned before, wrote a great book called The Way Out, where he outlines this extremely clearly, also with methods of how to help. And I'm going to kind of move on to that as well, because obviously I want to support people who are struggling with this, because it can be difficult work if you're especially if you're new to mind-body work and trying to, let's say, make sense of chronic pain for your own experience. These areas in fear to do with emotions and bodily sensations, from my perspective, in my opinion, are extremely important. So, you know, what can we do if we recognize that we are, I don't know, not connecting to our emotions and becoming afraid of certain aspects in our life, like moving or sitting, standing for a long time, and how we can sort of break the habit and come into our body with a little bit more safety. You know, I guess from you know, taking safety, let's say, as a perspective, this is one way in which we can reconnect and essentially learn that firstly the emotions and the bodily sensations are not a threat. So we can use something, this is something that Alan Gordon came up with, and there's other practitioners too that do similar methods, and it's called somatic tracking. And somatic tracking is essentially being with the sensations in your body and taking the focus off the pain, i.e. taking the focus off, wow, that hurts a lot, to what is the texture of the feeling in my body. So sometimes it can feel like a stabbing pain or a twisting sensation in your muscles. And the reason we're trying to build the habit of going to the sensations is because we've been so focused on the pain, we actually end up predicting the pain. And if we can move out of that space and go, okay, this is painful, obviously we need to accept that this is painful, but also what are the other elements in my body that I am experiencing right now? And it can be really difficult to begin with. There are practitioners that can support in this. I'm a coach and I've trained in pain reprocessing therapy, which is encompassing the somatic tracking technique. So you can also hit me up if you want some advice or just want to ask any questions about the process. But essentially what we're trying to do is practice being with the movements of our body and the movements of our emotions from a place of safety. Emotional safety is quite difficult also to start with, especially if we've been afraid of some deep emotional wounds. There can be deep emotional wounds or repression habits, essentially. You know, we might need help. Sometimes a counselor or a therapist, a doctor can help, who's a doctor who is versed in mind-body medicine and the areas that I'm discussing. You know, if you want to do it on your own, you can start a journaling practice and just start to connect to those emotions that you feel are your deepest wound. It can take time to learn this process, so it's not like, oh yeah, you can just go in one journaling session, write everything out, and then okay, yeah, you're good. I've dealt with it. And you have to feel them, and you have to cry. If it's sadness, you have to cry, and if it's anger, you have to give space to like, what's that anger? Where's that anger coming from? And being emotionally expressive in your journaling, i.e., not judging what you're writing too much. You're not writing an essay, so you don't need to spell check the whole thing all the time. Just need to give your space, and sometimes it can be 10 minutes, 20 minutes of just writing about, for instance, a time where you were told off as a kid for crying and how that felt. You know, just that in itself is a good exercise. I would also suggest learning about mind-body medicine, learning about mind-body pain. There's also multiple resources out there. Howard Schubner is another one. Dr. Sarno, I've mentioned many times, is a pioneer in this area. And the list goes on. There's really an awful lot of practitioners and research being done in this area, because the very clear understanding that seems to be coming through is that fear, repressed emotions, and the inability to express those emotions can cause chronic symptoms. So if you're in that boat, emotional expression and learning step by step, because it is scary. The reason you're in pain, the reason I was in pain, is because of the repressed emotional content and the fear of our bodily sensations. So to summarize my recommendations: learning to be a little bit more curious, recognizing your bodily sensations and trying to be accepting of them, even though I know it's fucking hard to do that. It's really difficult. I still am challenged with movements in my body and tensions that come forth, and I'm also challenged with my habit of denying emotions, or sometimes not even realizing. Sometimes we don't even know that we need to cry, or that we need to express something sort of deep and painful from our emotional past, essentially. And it takes time to practice, so give yourself a bit of space. Research a little bit, because I'm not the only person that talks about this stuff, and I'm certainly not a doctor or not a scientist. I'm a practitioner because I suffer from chronic pain for over 25 years. And as I'm going through the recovery process myself, the fear of emotions and the fear of bodily sensations have been absolutely massive for me, and really challenging area to get through. So when you're going into your body and you're trying to be curious, you're trying to bring messages of safety, you're trying to express emotions in yourself, you're learning a little bit about the reality of mind body work and emotions. You know, this is an entire system. It's not just one body part that is broken or weak or whatever. There's a lot of messages out there that aren't helpful. This is an entire system thing, and our system, our physiological system, is looking for balance, and sometimes that balance means crying, means breathing deeply, allowing yourself to feel things that you have not given yourself permission to feel. So there, I am hoping that I've summarized enough and been clear enough about the reasons why fear can perpetuate your pain. Try out some of the processes. Please research this stuff, especially if you're new to it, because it can be hard work accepting this stuff, and we're very good, really fucking good at denying our emotions. That's also okay. We need to be humble. We're only human. We want to survive. We want to feel good. You know, when we don't feel good, we build mechanisms that avoid that, because for multiple reasons that I've been through. So good luck with this work. I really hope this is helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next one.